never went into the problem of what do you do when really ignorant people seize power in the Republic. I'm gonna be studying, revisiting the Republic shortly, because it is a crisis, you know. As a lover of wisdom, a philosopher, you know, what do you do when really ignorant people that hate philosophy and hate wisdom and just want power try to seize it? Yes, so that's what I've been up to this week, and it's been interesting. That's just some of what I've been up to. Okay, any comments, questions, or additions?
Yes, about Hannah Arendt and the question of totalitarianism. I guess it's nowadays we have to examine that, because as I am concerned, I found that the worldwide policy during the pandemic of COVID-19 was a kind of totalitarianism. And there are two, maybe. One is bureaucracy. That's a big problem, because you have procedure and you have to follow the procedure like a machine.
Yeah.
You are not human anymore. You just have to follow the procedure.
Yes.
And it's crazy how decisions were taken by very few people with no debate. I don't heard any debate before the decision of shutting down liberty of going around because of pandemic. And all stuff.
But that started in China, didn't it?
Yeah.
And China's not famous for its liberty of debate.
Yeah, but China is okay for China, but as a French guy, I was very surprised of such a rigid decision with no debate. And the second one is, of course, propaganda. And nowadays you spoke about the internet, but there is also television, or so that's a big issue we have to deal with.
Yes.
And
I mean,
propaganda,
yeah.
I mean, for me, I'm more on the side of Musk on that point, because I say censorship is when you start censorship, it's like you put your finger maybe with good intentions, but after that, who controls the censorship? It's very difficult.
Well, okay. Thanks for raising this.
That's the question I was because the fact that Germany went so bad during preparing to World War II. Of course, I shared the same astonishment. Why so smart people?
Yeah. How could they fall for that? Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. Let me just respond a bit. So I agree with you, the bureaucracy thing is very important as a feature of all totalitarian regimes, Stalinist Russia, Nazi Germany, and so on. And this is to do with what Hannah Arendt calls the banality of evil. You know, Eichmann wasn't a particularly evil man in himself, but he was a cog in the machine, with all his bosses breathing on his neck, and they get into a sort of group think. I think even Hitler himself, I mean, he actually did try to even save a few people of Jewish or mixed origin. He'd unleashed this bureaucratic monster without really realizing, you know, the full extent of the horrors. I think the individual gets crushed and then can't speak out. And there were individual Germans who tried to do stuff. Obviously, you know, there was Oskar Schindler and people like that who kind of sneakily used the bureaucracy against itself. And my friend, well, my family's friend, Herb Steinhaus, met Oskar Schindler towards the end of his life he was a Jewish psychiatrist later, and helped set up the Canadian branch of UNESCO in Paris when Oskar Schindler turned up with a suitcase of documents and things. Nobody was interested in the story at the time. It was just after World War II. They wanted bad news, not good news. So about the media, that's the other problem, is that the media doesn't go for the good news. There are lots of people standing up to ignorance and idiocy, and I don't agree with you on the Musk thing. I think Musk has really, power's gone to his head. You need to watch that film about the Afrikaner roots of it all, the racism. It's a form of madness, but it's like he's spellbound people, and they feel they can't resist. And I think, as an intellectual, I think we have to resist this stuff. And I'll share another example. Just a couple of days ago in Britain, police attacked the Quaker Meeting House in Westminster, which I used to attend as a Quaker attendee. Quakers are pretty harmless. They're sworn to non-violence, right? Yeah. But a group of police stormed in and hauled out, I think, 6 young women who were having a meeting upstairs about protesting about the state of the world, climate change, and I don't know what, but that's what Quakers do. They have meetings and organise protests non-violently. And yet the police thought they would go in and capture these women with full-on battle gear on. Now that to me is a symbol of where we've got to as a society. It's in Britain as well as in America, and maybe in France too. That's why I'm a liberal Democrat. I believe in freedom of thought. I agree with this idea of freedom of conscience, freedom of speech. It should never be given up. So I'm against all totalitarianisms, including that of Robespierre and the extreme revolutionaries who made it a crime to speak up in favour of the king or the monarchy or the ancien regime. That you got your head chopped off. This is where I agree, like you, in debate, discussion, and evidence. Let's look at philosophically what works in society. What I'm suspicious of is this misuse of the term libertarian that Musk is using and Thiel. They're misusing this concept. It's like it's a fake use of the idea of liberty, because what they're doing is they're shutting down other people's liberty to have a job, to have somewhere to go. The years of work these people have done, they're suddenly out on the streets, jobless. That's not libertarianism. That's totalitarianism, pretending to be libertarianism. It's like the Nazis called themselves socialists, but that was a misuse of terms. As our friend Pierre Leroux would have said if he were around at the time, who coined the word, our local philosopher. And let me just quote something he said. I'm reading his book, the other thing I've been doing this week, De l'Humanité. It's a study of what is humanity, who are we. And he says early on in the book, he says the key questions the soul asks are, what am I? Where am I? Where am I going? And where have I come from? That's the beginning of philosophy. And I agree with Pierre Leroux. We have to ask these questions. And if we truly and deeply ask these questions, I don't think we'll behave in violent ways to each other. Anyway, okay, let's thank you. Let's move on and look at one of the projects from the 99 Names of Peace. Can you give me a number then, between 1 and 50?
33.
33, excellent. Now, potluck here. Oh, this is a good one. Yes.
I guess you don't have that one.
They're all, they're lifelong projects and ambitions and things I've been nurturing. It's like giving my family of ideas to the world. This one I think is a really important one, and I'd love to see it come to pass. And it's called Multi-Religious Affiliations Legalized. So, can you pass me the periodic table? Get a couple. Thank you. So the table is and we're going to look at it in a minute, but this is about multi-faith approach. And I worked at senior level in the interfaith movement. I was Secretary General of the World Conference on Religion and Peace, took me to the Vatican and all round different conferences. I met lots of the top interfaith people in the world. And I picked up from them and other circles this idea that it's very important for some people to safeguard their own specificity. So whilst I'm happy to talk to you of a different religion, I myself am X, and I will never ever become a Y, or accept that Y has got anything more than sort of quaint historical relevance, because really X is truth, right? And I was uncomfortable with that attitude, because I'm very much of a magpie, and I've studied and met people from all different faiths and taken initiations with them. So I'm a Sufi, I'm a Kabbalist, I'm a Christian, I'm a Quaker, I'm a humanist, I'm a Sikh, you know, I'm a yogi, I'm a shaman. And I honour and respect all these traditions. And I was a Buddhist before I was anything else, you know, looking for planetary enlightenment. And a Druid as well. So, but in some countries in the world that's illegal. You can only be one thing. And I would have this argument with my students. They would ask me, "Sir, where are you on the table? Which box are you in?" And I would say what I just said. I'd say, well, I've travelled around the block. You know, I've taken initiation, quite a lot of them. I'm a Jain as well, you know. No, you can't, they would say, because they've been taught to think like that. You can't be multi-faith. You have to choose just one. Now, actually, and I looked into this, you know, there's nothing in anything that says you can only be one. That's a false sort of meme that's gone into humanity. And I spoke to a good friend of mine, a Japanese professor who came to visit me years ago. And he explained to me that in Japan, everyone is both a Shintoist and a Buddhist and a Western scientist.
Yes.
And they've accepted aspects of Christianity and aspects of Taoism. So the average Japanese person is multi-ticking several boxes.
Yes, as a joke, I remember you say, you are born Shinto, your marriage is...
Shinto.
is Catholic or Christian,
okay.
And your death is a Buddhist.
Okay. Yeah. No, I've heard the same joke. So I realised by meeting people like that actually this idea you can only be one is, I think, a false assumption which is bred from the monotheistic position. And I think the monotheistic traditions have done the world a disservice by, you know, if there's only one God, then of course, you know, only one path can be true. And therefore I've got to make sure I'm on the winning team. And that means by definition, if your team is different, you must be on the losing team. And this is the origin of all the crusades and the pogroms and anti-Semitism and, you know, and. Now, the position I hold is that I don't have a problem with the core idea of monotheism, but I take Spinoza's view, which I call esoteric monotheism, which is that there's one ultimate reality behind all the boxes and all the faiths and all the godlets. Like in the Tarot of the Gods, there's many gods, but there's one god, which is the energy behind them all, light itself. They take different colours. So, and that was, I discovered, that's the Hermetic position. That's what they said in ancient Egypt. There are many netters, which is the Egyptian word for gods and goddesses, but there's one ultimate, you know, absolute behind them all. Now, so I think this idea, this project, is to legalise that and say, in law, in the constitutions of different countries, that you can be multi-faith. You can be a Muslim and you can be Jewish. Think what a huge impact that would have in the Israel-Palestine war. Imagine everybody suddenly said, okay, I've heard Dr. Daffon's talks, I think he's right. I'm going to sign up and be Jewish and Muslim and Christian. And I'll throw in Buddhism, why not? Because Ben Gurion was a Buddhist. So all that hatred of the other would dissolve overnight, because you'd realise that actually, no, I'm also that other. There's a part of me is Muslim, a part of me is Jewish. And And the more you study these things, the more you feel sympathetic to them. They're all incredible. You know, really research Judaism and study the works of the rabbis, and you say, yeah, I'm with them. Study Islam, the details of the Imams. You say, God, they're so clever. I want to be one of them too. And the same with the Christians and so on. So anyway, this is a project, the legalization of multi-religious affiliations, which in law is not yet on the statute book. Certainly not in the majority of countries. And I think it would be a real progress for the Enlightenment, for humanity, if we got that officially done. So that's the project. And ultimately the goal is to reach enlightenment within them. So yes, you could be a new religious practitioner of whatever, and also follow these ancient religions and so on. To me, what's the metaphysics behind it? Well, if we're all searching for enlightenment, which is my original Buddhist motivation, then surely these are all different modalities on the journey to enlightenment. And they've come out of the lineages of different prophets like Zoroaster or Moses or Jesus or Muhammad, who had their own enlightenment experiences. We don't have to be bounded or limited by them. Or that would be to like force the salt back into the salt cellar after it's come out. You know, that's silly. We should have our own enlightenment experiences. And that is actually what you know the prophets actually want, in my opinion. That's what Jesus says. You know, you guys will go on and do what I'm doing, any more so. And that's what all the good prophets and teachers of humanity always want, in my opinion. So I think this is a great thing. Sign the Interfaith Peace Treaty would come out of this. And I mean, I think the complete antithesis to this is what they've got in Russia at the moment. In Russia, they've clamped down on multi-faith activities. I had a very rude letter off the chap in the Russian Orthodox Church in charge of interfaith liaison, refusing to sign my Interfaith Peace Treaty and saying, I'm not going to sign that, they're all devil worshippers. Only the Russian Orthodox Church is the truth. Why would I bother with anything apart from the Orthodox box? And even then, within that box, just the Russian one. That's the opposite antithesis to what I'm talking about. So multi-religious affiliations legalised, number 33. And what's the language that goes with that is Czech. The Czech word for the piece is mir. And Czech, or Bohemian as it was called, is a very interesting culture and language. I've studied in Prague, I've been there to meetings. I go into the history of the language, and Jan Hus and other intellectuals who wanted a sort of freedom of thought. And Comenius, who was from the Bohemian Brethren, he was one of the great peace teachers of the church in the 1600s. He wrote a book called Irenica quaedam scripta pro pace ecclesia. He wanted to see peace become the main modality of Christianity in the world. He was inspired by Jacob Boehme, and he inspired people in Britain as well. Comenius came to London at the time of the Republic under Cromwell, brief moment of democracy, and he was going to advise the education reformation in Britain. He was a teacher, and he thought it's very important that we teach children from an early age to think independently. And he said, you know, he wrote textbooks for kids, using pictures as well, because that's children like to learn with pictures. So Comenius, so I go into the whole history of these great Czechs, and Thomas Masaryk, who became president of independent Czechoslovakia after World War I, has always been one of my favourite intellectuals. He was a sociologist and philosopher, married to an American Unitarian woman, right? And he was one of the lecturers at my old college at the University of London, School of East European and Independent East European and Slavonic Studies. We had a plaque on the wall, you know, in honour of Masaryk, who was there for a couple of years.
If only we could have such political staff nowadays, in spite of banksters.
Well, we do. I mean, I would say Tim Snyder is professor of history at Yale. He's of a similar class to Masaryk. He's just not the president of the country, sadly. But no, the Czechs I have great respect for, and I love their country and their culture. And their music. Smetana is one of my favourite musicians. And I love the novel The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, you know. And of course, you know, so there's been a lot of great Czechs. And I went to Prague, I went in 1991 to something called the Helsinki Citizens Assembly, organised by Mary Kaldor and others. It was a moment of brief light in European history when we thought the Cold War was over, we could all live in harmony.
Yeah.
There are people from every European nation, young people, from Russia, from Poland, from Finland, from Britain. I'd gone with a contingent by train, going through Berlin and then down across from Berlin on the train through Dresden onto Prague. And it was just a beautiful moment when we were thinking, well, how can we design a Europe living in peace? Stretching from the Urals to the Atlantic was our slogan. Obviously, Putin didn't come to that conference. He didn't share that dream, sadly, and he's retrograded that whole thing. I still believe in that dream, the Helsinki Citizens Assembly, and I think most of us in Europe still do, and we will get there. And in order to get there, it'd be helpful if we have this multi-faith religions affiliation encoded into our legal systems. And if you think it doesn't matter, just do it anyway. Now, law does matter. One of the great philosophers of the 19th century that influenced Karl Marx was this man Ludwig Feuerbach, who was a great philosopher, left Hegelian, like Marx. And his father was a legal jurist in the Kingdom of Bavaria who managed to get through in law the abolition of torture. Because up to that point, you can still in the Bavarian Kingdom with, you know, if somebody wouldn't confess or whatever, you could torture them, as was true in many countries. So those Enlightenment thinkers made it a law that you can't torture people. And apparently in America, they've found ways to get around that, sadly. But in most civilized countries, torture is off the statute book, but they use it in Putin's Russia and in you know, certain aspects of American society with waterboarding and all that. Well, no, that's all wrong. So I'm just saying that Feuerbach's father, I think, could write if he can send down from the heaven worlds a kind of way to get this into the statute book about the you know, the ecumenical approach to religious identity, because I think at that point we have a carte blanche to really go deeply into all these faith paths. Okay, right. Well, let's do a couple of these then. We'll move on. You choose one, and I'll choose one.
Did we make esoteric transpersonal 126 before? I don't think so.
No, I don't think we've had that one. No, that's a good one. Right. Gosh, which one am I going to have? Yes. Well, I'm going to go for the very last one, which is 168, the humanities. I don't think we've had that one either. So, let's go with your one first, the esoteric number 126.
It could be a path to the interface legislation.
Yes, there is a connection there, obviously. So this is what interested me from quite early on studying philosophy when I threw myself deeply into the study of philosophy. I realised that having read the Quran, having read the Bible, having read the Vedas and the Buddhist scriptures and then all the philosophers that have worked in those lineages, I realised they're all pointing to an esoteric common truths. I discovered people like Aldous Huxley had said this before me. He talks about the perennial philosophy. And I thought, well, obviously, so why don't more people talk about this? Why isn't this established? This was at the time, I was living in Canada using the University of Calgary, when America and Iran were poised on a sort of nuclear war confrontation after the Shia Iranians had captured the American embassy and they were holding hostages. And I was nursing people in a veterans hospital, some of whom were saying, bless their souls, well, why don't we just nuke Iran? You know, like, why don't we just get it over with? And I was thinking with horror, because I just finished reading the Quran and Munasadra and the depth of Shia philosophical wisdom. And I knew that what these Shia Muslims in Iran had been saying was almost identical to the whole New Age concepts of American philosophy, starting with Emerson and the so-called New Thought movement, that how your mind thinks, you create that reality. Well, the Shias had said this 1,000 years before, that God is the divine mind, and we can channel that, and we can steer it, and we can work with it. And that's what Muhammad had been able to do. That's where prophecy comes from. So let's tune into that level of gnosis, said the Shia Muslims, and then we can adjust our lives to the current and the divine will. Because don't forget, Christ wants us to follow the will of the Father. So I was thinking, well, hang on, the Americans and the Iranians are saying exactly the same thing. So why can't we build peace through that? You know, let's get that known. And I thought the esoteric traditions are actually the way to get everyone to go in that same direction. And I threw myself into, therefore, I came out to London, founded Philosophers of Peace, and did a course in transpersonal psychology at City University in London, and studied with a woman called Hazel Guest, who taught, I'd never heard of it, I'd never been taught it before, but I'd found my way to this concept of transpersonal psychology based on the works of Jung, Carl Jung, and others, Abraham Maslow and Stan Grof, that had studied the human psyche and realised there are common universal archetypes within us all. Whether you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever, the same kinds of psychological experiences happen. And therefore, we can begin to analyse these things universally. Assagioli was another from northern Italy, who originally started out with Freud, but split from Freud's resistance against any kind of spiritual side to human nature. These people, the transpersonalists, were saying, no, there's a common spiritual nature to all of us, and we have to honour that and find out how it works, objectively. Abraham Maslow talked about this, his famous pyramid, and he talks about the meta-values at the heart of the human. We need meaning, we need purpose, we need enlightenment, ultimately, sense of well-being, etc. So how do we do that? What is that? So that I then did a course in Jungian psychology as well, and got very into the depths of Jung's approach, because he was one of the pioneers of all this. This was at the time when Ken Wilber was just starting to publish his work, and I thought, no, there's a kindred spirit, publishing with Shambhala. And I studied James Hillman, another great Jungian philosopher who was saying the same. And so these people these were the transpersonalists who were coming from that esoteric background like me, but saying, let's now work it out scientifically. Let's try and see if we can prove this scientifically. So they founded things like the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California, which I joined, and the Scientific and Medical Network, which is based in London and meets online now. And I worked with those people, and also the Wrekin Trust, Sir George Trevelyan founded, heard lectures by all these visionary people. I think they're the way to go for humanity, because by looking at what we have in common as a planet, as one planetary humanity, and emphasising that, we can then appreciate the diversity properly. You might be a shaman in the the rainforests of the Amazon, and you might work with ayahuasca as your chosen portal to the divine awareness, and that's fine. Transpersonal thinkers have worked with psychedelics as a portal gateway. But you don't need it. You don't need to take it up the mountain, as Buddha said. He said, my teachings are a raft to cross the river of suffering, but once you get to the other side, don't take the raft up the mountain. In other words, you can drop the formal structures of Dharmic teaching once you've reached a place of gnosis and enlightenment, which is why the truly enlightened people are much more flexible. And they're not like bureaucrats of spirit. Your point about bureaucracy is very inflexible, very stuck. That's a sign of lack of enlightenment.
Yes, I was thinking about difference between religion, true religion, and clergy people. Clergy may behave sometimes like bureaucrats.
Oh, they are sort of bureaucrats of spirit, which is unfortunate, because I like that guy that wrote to me from the Russian Orthodox Church. I mean, that guy should be sacked, and he shouldn't be in a position like that. But I've met bishops and I've met cardinals who are flexible, who have a mind that realizes what I'm saying, and want to bear witness to that within the structures of the church, And the same in the Anglican tradition. I've met very enlightened Anglican theologians and divines who have that flexibility. And also in Buddhist and Hindu circles, the really wise sages resonate with this idea of flexibility, in my experience. The other ones, well, you just have to work around them. So anyway, it's, yeah. And yet the trouble is, of course, that sometimes the power holders, like in Putin's Russia, the Orthodox guys, call the other ones heretics. And this is the name calling that goes on. And one has to be very careful to dodge the bullets. We're all doing a ghost dance here. But wisdom will win. That's the faith of these great teachers that I'm just following on in their footsteps. One of them is a chap called Haridas Chowdhury, who was a disciple of Sri Aurobindo, who was a great Hindu philosopher, an esoteric thinker of a high order. And Chowdhury went to California and founded the Institute of Integral Studies, which is still going in San Francisco, and they're doing this kind of work. Richard Tarnas teaches there, and many other colleagues and friends of mine. These are the real saints on the planet right now, as far as I'm concerned. The problem with the libertarians, let me just go back for a second, Peter Thiel and people, is they've sort of got half right. Their instinct is, we want to be free of all structures. We want to be totally free. We want to, everybody can be everything, But their mistake is that they want to they think they therefore have to smash everything. Smash all government, smash all bureaucracy, smash everything that, is obstructing our freedom. The instinct isn't necessarily evil. This is the problem, is a lot of evil is done by people thinking they're doing the good.
That's okay.
But what they need to do is to really study what I'm saying, to really study the esoteric wisdom. And that is about working with the form. So you've got Ibn Arabi, the greatest Sufi master of Islam. It's not that when he reached enlightenment, became a Sufi enlightened master, he stopped going to prayers on a Friday. Or he started, dancing in the streets with no clothes on or anything. No, you stick to the form. You observe the structures. Or some great Christian sages, like René Girard, who was one of the greatest Catholic philosophers and anthropologists. He'd go to mass, and do his rituals, but in his soul, he carried the freedom of enlightenment. I'll come to René Girard another time. I'm going to share, because there's a lot in that one. Okay, that's... So I hope, any questions about that?
A comment came to my mind about what you said about research and some